This is Leader Time by FedNet, your podcast source for floor remarks by Senate Majority Leader John Thune and Democratic Leader Chuck Schumer during the 119th Congress. On June 17th, Thune condemned the shooting of Minnesota lawmakers and expressed solidarity with Israel's military response to Iranian-backed terrorism and defended Medicaid reforms in the budget reconciliation bill. The following material is protected by copyright.
Mr. President, like all Americans, I was horrified to hear about this weekend shootings of two state lawmakers in Minnesota and their spouses. Melissa Hortman, a member of the Minnesota House of Representatives, and her husband Mark were murdered on Saturday. And John Hoffman, a member of the state Senate, and his wife Yvette were seriously wounded. I'm profoundly grateful to law enforcement that the alleged shooter is now in custody, and I look forward to seeing him prosecuted to the fullest extent of the law. There's no place for this kind of violence in our country. None. My prayers this morning are with the Hortman's family and loved ones, and for the speedy recovery of John and Yvette Hoffman. Mr. President, for far too long, the mullahs in Iran have publicly aspired to wipe Israel off the face of the map. And for decades, they have fomented a campaign of terror throughout the Middle East, threatening Israel and innocents everywhere and destabilizing the entire region. It was Hamas who killed more than 1,000 Israelis on October 7, 2023. But it was Iran who made that attack possible through years of funding, training, and weaponry provided to this terrorist organization. Mr. President, in the early hours of Friday morning, Israel struck back, attacking a number of sites in Iran, including sites associated with Iran's nuclear program. I spoke with the Israeli ambassador on Friday and assured him of my prayers for Israel's safety during this time and my hope that their operations, and any to come, will succeed in eliminating the prospect of a nuclear-armed Iran and ultimately help bring peace to a region that has for far too long been at war. While the U.S. military is not involved in offensive operations against Iran, U.S. forces on land, at sea, and in the air have helped defend Israel from indiscriminate missile attacks launched by Iran. President Trump and our country remain steadfast in our defense of Israel and committed to working toward peace in the Middle East, and first and foremost, for the safety of American personnel stationed in the region. And should Iran have any designs on Americans, I urge the mullahs to think long and hard about the consequences. Well, Mr. President, Democrats continue to melt down over the reconciliation bill that Republicans are getting ready to consider. And their statements continue to be heavy on the hysteria and short on the facts. And nowhere is this more true than on the subject of the bill's Medicaid provisions. To hear Democrats talk, you'd think Republicans were getting ready to rip Medicaid from the hands of needy children and pregnant women. And nothing, Mr. President, nothing could be further from the truth. And today I would like to take a few minutes to set the record straight and highlight the facts on Republicans' efforts to root out waste, fraud, and abuse from Medicaid and ensure that the focus of this program is on the people that it was designed to help. Mr. President, like other federal entitlement programs, Medicaid is not on the soundest footing. Between Obamacare's expansion of Medicaid to able-bodied adults at or above 138% of the federal poverty line and the Biden administration's rules and waivers, Democrats have been growing Medicaid beyond its original scope for quite a while now. And federal Medicaid spending has soared. Between 2019 and 2023, Medicaid spending grew at more than 50%. And that kind of unsustainable growth, Mr. President, has consequences. Not just for taxpayers who are on the hook for huge new amounts of money, but for the people most in need, who have to compete with a lot of new individuals for available resources. Mr. President, Republicans are committed to preserving and strengthening Medicaid for the people Medicaid was intended to serve, like vulnerable children, pregnant moms, and elderly Americans. And to that end, we're making some common sense reforms to Medicaid to eliminate waste, fraud, and abuse and protect the program for the people who need it the most. And that starts with removing people who should not be on the rolls. That means illegal immigrants and other non-citizens, able-bodied adults who can work but refuse to work, and individuals who don't qualify for the program. We're going to rein in federal spending to states that choose to direct scarce state dollars to illegal immigrants. We will be instituting basic, common sense work requirements for able-bodied working-age adults who should not be relying on taxpayers for their health care unless they are doing their best to find and maintain a job or contribute to their communities. And we will be overturning Biden-era regulations that made it difficult to remove individuals who don't qualify for the program. Are Democrats seriously going to tell us they have a problem with that? Removing these individuals is just basic good governance. It's fulfilling our barest obligation to ensure that Medicaid is working well for its intended recipients. Mr. President, I would note that while Democrat senators may be melting down over these basic good governance requirements, some of their states are actually taking similar measures. No less a Democrat state than California is looking to freeze the enrollment of illegal immigrants in its Medicaid program and charge premiums for illegal immigrants already enrolled. Why? Because the state can no longer afford to cover these individuals and maintain its other obligations. And yet Democrat senators here in Washington are melting down because Republicans are daring to focus limited Medicaid dollars on American citizens and those most in need. Mr. President, in addition to ensuring that the individuals on Medicaid rolls are the ones who should be there, Republicans are making several other common sense reforms. Notably, Mr. President, we are taking aim at rampant abuse of the provider tax loophole. Use of this loophole, which sees states inflate Medicaid service prices in order to garner a larger reimbursement from the federal government, was already a problem even before the Biden administration. In fact, President Obama released multiple budgets featuring measures to rein in abuse of the provider tax. But thanks to waivers the Biden administration issued to California and other blue states last year, allowing them to further exploit this loophole, taxpayers are now on the hook for tens of billions of dollars in new spending. Neither the Medicaid program nor taxpayers can afford that burden. And so we're going to rein things in. Mr. President, our bill makes a handful of other modest reforms to restrain waste, fraud, and abuse, but those I just mentioned are the big ones. Common sense reforms to protect and strengthen Medicaid for those who need it the most. And I would love to know which of these reforms my colleagues object to. We've heard a lot of bluster from Democrats about how this bill will cost enrollment and cost lives, but we've heard very little from them on the actual measures included in the bill. And so, Mr. President, I'd like to ask them, do they believe the federal government should still be giving states an enhanced Medicaid match if they cover illegal immigrants? Do they think individuals who don't qualify for Medicaid should remain on the rolls? Are they against work requirements for able-bodied working-age adults? Do they think there should be any limits on states exploiting the provider tax loophole? Exactly which of our common sense reforms do Democrats disagree with? Mr. President, Democrats used to support rooting out waste, fraud, and abuse in Medicaid and getting Americans back to work. So what's changed? Mr. President, while I can't guarantee the source of Democrats' hysteria, I suspect one or more of the following things is going on here. One, Democrats are still smarting from their election loss last November and are desperate to regain ground with voters. And I suspect that Democrats think that if they can successfully, even if inaccurately, paint Republicans as targeting vulnerable Americans, they might be able to claw back some electoral support. Two, I think Democrats tend to reflexively oppose anything supported by President Trump, no matter how sensible that policy might be. And three, I think that with Democrats' increasing embrace of the far left, there are Democrats out there who really do believe that government programs can continually expand without consequences, and that there's no limit to the amount of taxpayer dollars available for them to play with. Still, Mr. President, it's incredible that we can't agree on these common sense reforms. But we're going to move full speed ahead, protecting and preserving Medicaid for the Americans this program was intended to serve. I want to thank Chairman Crapo and members of the Finance Committee for their work on the Medicaid provisions of our bill. And, Mr. President, I look forward to taking up these provisions in the very near future as part of our final legislation.
Schumer took his time to address lawmakers' safety after the Minnesota incident. He then criticized Medicaid, clean energy, tax policy, gun deregulation, and abortion provisions in the reconciliation package, and California Senator Alex Padilla's treatment at a DHS news conference days earlier.
Mr. President, first about safety in the Capitol and our meeting today that Senator Thune and I called. First, I'd like to say that the Capitol Police have always been the silent heroes behind the scenes keeping members safe. That's no secret. The country saw that for themselves on January 6th and in the footage after. And they're doing a good job. We had a very good meeting where members brought up their concerns, and strong efforts are going to be made to answer those concerns with an expanded activity by the Capitol Police. But after the awful situation this weekend, there's real concern not just here in the Capitol, but with folks across the country about the safety of elected officials. These violent acts are an attack not just on the individuals who are targeted, but on our democracy itself. Public servants should never have to fear for their lives simply for doing their job. Public servants, there should not be an attempt to intimidate public servants not to do their job or not to take their job. So we need immediate steps. We need to take immediate steps to ensure the safety of members. That includes sending additional funding and resources to the Capitol Police. And there was agreement today in the Senate among Democrats and Republicans that we ought to be spending some more dollars here to protect the Capitol, the senators, and their staffs. But it's amazing. Instead, the Trump administration is doing the exact opposite. USA Today reported that as lone actor attacks are on the rise, Donald Trump had cut the program called Aimed at spotting them. This program is aimed to spot lone actor violent domestic extremists. Exactly what happened in Minnesota. But the day before a violent political attack in Minnesota occurred, the last top officials at a program that aims to spot the so-called lone actor violent domestic extremists were reassigned to other roles. And that's USA's reporting. In the 4 months since Trump took office, his administration has shrunk the Department of Homeland Security's Center for Prevention, Programs, and Partnerships, it's known as CP3, from dozens of analysts and supervisors. Now it has fewer than 10 people, led by a 22-year-old recent graduate with no law enforcement experience. Here we have more violent attacks, and at the same time, the Trump administration is cutting the very unit in law enforcement that's supposed to go after these lone wolf violent attacks and prevent them. Right now, we need to give law enforcement more resources to prevent these horrific attacks, not less. A program in charge of doing these things shouldn't have fewer than 10 people and be led by a 22-year-old with no experience. And what I'm saying here, that this program has been cut dramatically, the aimed program, will reverberate among everybody who wants a safer America, and should reverberate among all elected officials, Democrat and Republican, about the need to keep these programs. So we need to give more resources to law enforcement. But let me be clear. This dangerous environment isn't spontaneous. It's being stoked, often deliberately, by the reckless rhetoric coming from some of the most powerful voices in the country. When political opponents are treated like enemies, danger follows. And that's what Donald Trump has done. He's weaponized the Justice Department and law enforcement into going after his political enemies instead of going after criminals. It's the responsibility of all leaders, especially the President of the United States, to not just unequivocally condemn hatred, but to stop violent and aggressive language against political opponents. Trump has to see that his words have real impact and consequences. And here's one way he could start right now. He could demand of Senator Lee that he take down his inflammatory, despicable posts about the deaths of the two people in Minnesota. They're gross, they're disgusting, they're the kind of thing that just riles people up. Let Trump call Lee up and say, take them down, take those posts down. That'll be a start. But in general, he has to stop treating his political opponents as enemies, because danger will always follow. Last night on reconciliation, last night on the Senate Finance Committee, the Republicans released their portion of Donald Trump's big, ugly bill, his big, ugly betrayal. And hard to believe, it's even worse than expected. After Senate Republicans spent weeks promising they were going to moderate the House bill, they did just the opposite. They turned an ugly House bill into an outright travesty. Senate Republicans should reject the proposals from the Finance Committee and start over. Because if they proceed, they will harm tens of millions of Americans, kill millions of good-paying jobs, raise prices across or up and down on the average American, and help China. Let's go over these lowlights, starting with health care. The House bill already had the biggest cuts to Medicaid in American history. They're regarded as devastating. But the Senate version is even worse than the House version. It's the House bill on steroids. The Medicaid cuts are deeper, reach further, and the red tape is even longer than what House Republicans came up with. Under the Senate bill, tens of millions of Americans will lose health insurance, including working moms and dads. More hospitals will close, especially rural hospitals. And I tell my colleagues, that's mainly in red states. And these rural hospitals are often the only way people get health care in the rural communities, and they're often the largest employer in the states as well. Under their bill, doctors will lose their jobs, nurses will lose their jobs, states will carry more and more of the burden with fewer and fewer resources, which mean cutbacks. Premiums will go up. What you pay, the average American pays for health care will inevitably go up, even if you don't have Medicare or Medicaid. Now, I know there are a number of Senate Republicans who were worried about the Medicaid cuts passed by the House. But because the Senate package is even worse, I urge these Republicans to forcefully reject this proposal quickly. We know that if only 3 or 4 Republicans went to Leader Thune and said we can't vote for this bill with these Medicaid cuts, some of the cuts at least would be eliminated. If they go along with this package, anyone who goes along with this package will be responsible for stealing health care from millions of their own constituents. That's true of Democrats and Republicans. Now, what about clean energy jobs? Remember how the Senate Republicans spent weeks promising they'd ease clean energy cuts passed by the House? Well, the Senate Republican clean energy package is a total head fake. That's all it is. They're trying to act like they got better, but they didn't. No matter what the Senate Republicans try to say about improving the House bill, the underlying substance did not change. The Senate clean energy bill cuts are every bit as destructive as the House proposal. It phases out tax credits for wind and solar projects within 6 months. And these phase-outs are a death sentence for clean energy. Wind and solar represent more than 90% of the new electric power in the United States. It's the quickest, cheapest way to bring power. What do Republicans think will happen when they raise taxes on 90% of our new electricity? They're going to send electric bills soaring. They're going to kill good-paying clean energy jobs. Estimated 850,000 people in the clean energy industry will lose their jobs. And they're going to surrender U.S. energy independence to China, which will leap ahead of us in wind and solar and dominate the world markets. American consumers will be at the behest of the Chinese Communist Party leaders in terms of what they pay for electricity. And these cuts will choke America's energy output right as we need to expand our capacity. We all know AI is going to demand huge amounts of electricity, and yet we cut off the quickest, cheapest way to add energy. Many on the other side say all of the above. This is not all of the above. This is just taking the most polluting, most expensive, most time-consuming way of producing energy. That's what it allows. It takes away the rest. 80% of the clean energy investments, we know, have been in Republican districts, but Senate Republicans are going to ship those jobs overseas. Anyone who votes for this bill and has clean energy facilities in their states, they're going to close those factories, limit those factories, and send the jobs to China. Just the opposite of what Trump says he wants to do. The bad news keeps coming. The Senate proposal does nothing to moderate the House SNAP benefits. It's still the biggest cuts to SNAP in history, depriving millions of kids and parents of vital food assistance. Senate Republicans have even found a way to bow down to the radical gun lobby. Remember, the House bill already had an insane provision that deregulated common sense rules on silencers that go back almost a century. But Senate Republicans, refusing to be outdone by their extreme House colleagues, removed registration requirements not just for silencers, but for short-barreled rifles, short-barreled shotguns, and other devices. This is unhinged. Shame on Senate Republicans for choosing the gun lobby over the lives of our kids. Their proposal will mean gun violence will rise, police officers will be put at risk, innocent people will die. Finally, why are Republicans doing all of this? What's their North Star? Tax cuts for billionaires paid for by working families. This is the big difference, folks, between Democrats and Republicans. Democrats believe in lowering taxes, but we need to prioritize Americans who aren't ultra-rich, working families, the middle class, parents raising their kids, and small business owners trying to grow. But Republicans, meanwhile, believe in giving most of the help to the people at the very top. They believe that helping billionaires and big corporations is somehow going to make everyone better off. It's never worked. Trickle-down's discredited. They cling to it because they're in the obeisance of a handful of very greedy billionaires who seem to run the Republican Party on economic issues. Under their proposal, the top 0.1% of our earners will get an average tax cut of $400,000, but families earning less than $75,000 will be worse off. They'll actually lose household wealth. Under $75,000, you lose wealth. Over in top 0.1%, you gain an average cut of $400,000. The American people like that. The more they know, the less they like. When you put it all together, the Senate's version of the Senate Republican version of Donald Trump's big, ugly bill is even worse than the House. It makes even deeper cuts to health care. It destroys American clean energy. It raises costs on working and middle-class families and rewards the billionaires at the very top of the economic ladder. I have a few more things to say. Abortion. Next week marks a very grim anniversary in America, 3 years since the disastrous Dobbs decision. 3 years later, 21 states have restricted the right to choose. 14 states have practically total abortion bans. And what is the Republicans' response? They want to keep going, attack reproductive care even more. Deep inside Republicans' big, ugly betrayal bill, they have snuck in a backdoor abortion ban. First, they have a provision that would defund Planned Parenthood. Second, they have a provision to eliminate coverage for comprehensive reproductive care from the marketplace. Senate Democrats will fight these devastating and deadly measures with everything we got, including through the birdbath. Both provisions have to go through the birdbath. Because here are the consequences of the Republican provisions. 200 Planned Parenthood health centers in 24 states would close. 90% of these closures would be in states where abortion is currently legal. So much for states' rights, not when it comes to abortion or guns with this Republican Party. And why are they doing this? Well, part of it's ideological, but part of it is to fund tax cuts for billionaires. It's an assault not just on Planned Parenthood, not just on reproductive care, but on every woman in America. Democrats will fight these backdoor abortion bans with every fiber of our being. And finally, on Senator Padilla's speech, and I see he's just come into the chamber, today at 12:30, our colleague Senator Padilla will speak on the Senate floor. For the first time, he was forcibly removed from a public briefing just for doing his job. I'll be here on the floor to listen to Senator Padilla speak. I encourage all of my colleagues, Democrat and Republican, to come and listen as well. What Senator Padilla experienced last week sickened all of us to our core, sickened every decent American to their core. No senator should be treated the way he was, manhandled, taken to the ground, handcuffed. It's not a moment for partisanship. Oh, no. It's about all senators supporting a colleague who was treated inexcusably for doing his job. I look forward to hearing Senator Padilla's speech later, and I encourage all of my colleagues to do the same. Yield the floor.
The clerk will report the motion to invoke cloture.
Cloture motion. We, the undersigned senators, in accordance with the provisions of Rule 22 of the Standing Rules of the Senate, do hereby move to bring to a close debate on the nomination.
Thanks for listening. Subscribe and tell your friends about us. This program is copyrighted by Federal Network, Incorporated, and provided only for informational and educational purposes. Unauthorized reproduction, distribution, or use of this episode without expressed written permission from FedNet is prohibited.